Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. Today, we welcome editor Viridiana Lieberman, who joins us to talk about their work on the documentary The Perfect Neighbour. Viri will talk us through editing a film primarily shot through bodycam and archival footage. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Viri. Hi Viri, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
We're here to talk about The Perfect Neighbour, which has recently come out on Netflix. What can I say? How have you found the reaction to the whole to the doc?
I mean, when we premiered at Sundance, we had such an incredible reaction, and I remember sitting there going like, "Wow, it is resonating. It is doing the things we dreamed it could do," and I was very excited. And then there's that moment where you're like, "Is that just the magic of Sundance?" In this moment, like, well, is that just the space and the time? And then every film festival, it was almost like somebody had just unpaused and it was the same reaction. And then all of the write-ups and the reviews, and we thought, wow, wow, wow. But there was still this understanding that once we released on Netflix, the film would in a lot of ways become the world's, and it would take on a whole new dynamic. And which it has. Which it has. I mean, not only the amount of people it's reached, the idea that it was number one here and in so many countries and still like number two, which is bananas, but the scope of conversation, right? The like expanse of discourse about it, that folks are unpacking it on all the layers that we intended and also were just kind of inherent in the material has been incredible. And it's obviously hit the zeitgeist and struck a nerve in an important way. I mean, change is already happening, I feel like in the sense of opening conversations and people being educated. And of course, the experience, I think, number one, the work on society and social and all of Stand Your Ground and all of those things were number one. And then there was also the approach that we took in the storytelling that was so important to us, which people have really grasped and taken in and discussed what it's like to watch that type of footage in this way and let it speak for itself. And that really excites me because I've spent many, many years, in rooms saying, like, trust the audience, like they can handle it. We can learn through discovery, we can observe and so much more can get done when you don't kind of create the confines of fitting a formula or feeding the algorithm and all of this. And so that's another level of this film that I've been really grateful has seemed to permeate and is being taken in not just by the audience that's watching it but by other storytellers and filmmakers that I've met.
Yeah, I think so. Just going back because the film premiered at Sundance, and which is obviously a really big thing, and then when it
Yeah.
hits next sort of film festivals as well, that's in its like bubble in its own self because it's not to sound snobby, but the film festival crowd is going to be different to like an
Oh yeah.
ordinary audience, and I feel like, probably when people are watching it, you could probably hear pin drop with the reactions and just with everything going on and probably the audible gasps about what within the story as well. But then also the power of Netflix where it's literally just like, yeah, we can put this out and it will hit number one in X amount of countries and people and so many people will see it and so many people will be like, oh my gosh, this is incredible, but then also at the same time, like so like soul destroying.
Yep.
But then also what I was going to point out as well, like Netflix is like just because usually with if you have like a documentary on something like HBO, they probably have some sort of like staggered release. So maybe people in the UK might not watch it until a few months later. But then with so many people watching it at the same time, I feel like as well, like there's so much more of a collective audience watching it and understanding it and sort of reacting to it at the same time.
Yes, I've been so fascinated to hear other countries, to kind of read some articles from that. I had the privilege of going to Copenhagen to participate in an event that with a group of editors, and it was a very, I think, once in a lifetime kind of strange experience to be there with a film that was currently number one in Denmark, like on Netflix, that they were not only watching to engage with, but was being consumed, by their country. Also, at a time like now, to be engaging with these, but be, in another country, talking about these issues, very much the states related. So there's so many factors when it comes to this film and this moment and that platform. Yes, Netflix is instantaneous across the planet. And that was a moment the night we released. That was a moment where we all were on a text thread taking that in. We're like, wow, by tomorrow, the entire planet will have access to watch our film, which I've never experienced on a doc I've worked on. I think they've, yeah, staggered releases or just not necessarily having platforms push it as much as Netflix did, which was really impressive. How much that they made sure that we had our best shot to be seen. So hats off to them, and particularly in that, a platform that has had a huge influence on our medium, what we do, how we do it. And I think it was a testament to them to see our film as something that they wanted to do that work with, and the visibility, when it doesn't quite fit all of the things that they do, like it was, everything about it is really still blows my mind. You're catching me at a moment where I can't quite compute it in a really good way, in a really powerful way. And someday I'll look back and go, wow, that happened. Or maybe just as human beings, we can't really have the concept that every single person's TV that has Netflix and every single person's phone, and that little thumbnail is sitting there right now. It's wild.
Maybe in 6 months' time, or maybe a year, you could probably look back and actually it might just like click a little bit, and you'd be like, oh,
Yeah.
what a weird moment in time, and like catching that wave of the cultural sort of relevance and shift at
Yeah, the
that time.
zeitgeist. Yes, and but I think that when I dream that it will hit me, will be when cultural changes is happening, right? Like when there are laws changing, or debates taking place, or conversations, or am eavesdropping on someone dissecting an element of our film, whether it's in the context of our film or just something that our film was engaging in. To kind of know that that is active in doing the change work. I think all of a sudden they'll go, oh, this could be everywhere right now, which would be amazing. Yeah.
I do wonder what that must feel then. Like, when you look back at it, that feeling. Maybe I could email you in 6 months' time to say
Please
any
do.
change, and you're like, no, I still can't comprehend it. I still can't get my head around the
Maybe,
whole
maybe.
thing.
Please do. Please do. Yeah. I mean, I think that what we do, we dream. We dream every time I finish a film, we dream with whatever team, whatever story in documentary. The dream is that of the work it will do and the people it will reach. And although that is felt not only relevant, but active and present in previous work, this does feel very different and special. So yeah, yeah, yeah. Call me back.
Oh well, I think that'll be the best thing to do. And
Please
then
do. Please do.
just to get maybe a sense of like, wow. But let's go back to the beginning. How did the
Please do.
project come about, and what made you want to take it on?
Well, Geeta Gambir, who's the director, I've worked with her before. We've done a handful of projects that span features and shorts and TV. And we've built a beautiful trust in a language between us. She was an editor for a long time. And I think that really has created a space for understanding and encouragement. And she kind of can meet me with what I love to do and see it for what it is and work within that language. We've just kind of created a collaboration that I'm very proud of and grateful for. And this was a personal story for her. So this is a family friend who died. And she, when this event happened, she initially went to Florida and activated with the family just to help them. I mean, when they sued the police department to get these materials, that was originally just to kind of gather the evidence to make sure Susan got arrested because they weren't sure if it was going to happen or if she would get off. All of these things were on the table and were being feared. And so that they would happen. So at first it was just in support of the family. And then once they gathered all these materials and started looking through them and realized, wow, there's something else here. There's a bigger story and the potential. She did see the potential in telling a majority of the story, if not all, with that material. And she called me and told me the story and told me about it and also said, I think we could do it through the body cams. And I immediately, beyond our relationship and my excitement to work with her again, the idea of composing an entire story out of those materials was like, I mean, thrilling as an editor to take on that challenge and with such a goal in mind and a story and the personal. I've had the privilege of cutting a handful of people's personal projects, and that sounds strange because all films can feel personal to people, but I mean in the sense that they know who's at the center of it. It's somebody that they're related to, and those filmmakers have come to me and kind of said, I'm too close to it. Help me. Let's figure it out together and give me that perspective. And that was in the idea that Gita came to me, this very prestigious, renowned filmmaker I've worked with on so many things, to say like, all right, this is going to be my personal, she could feel that. And she wanted me to do it. It was a huge honor. So it was both in the ask and the challenge that I was like, wow, this is a really special moment. And I was determined from the beginning. I was like, we will do it through those materials. We did look into, they had started filming with the family after it while they were doing that advocacy work to try to make sure everything happened the way it should in the justice regard. But when I watched all of that stuff and we kind of worked through the story, it was clear that committing to this approach would create something that we had never seen before and that we believed could do the work in a way that was really important and undeniable. So, yeah, I mean, I got involved from my relationship to Gita, but I will say that the materials really created a landscape that I was excited to take on and that I knew was going to be purely instinct driven. There was no comp for it. It was like, we're just going to have to do what feels right. And that made for what it is and kind of created a brand new opportunity.
When you get an opportunity to work with someone again, I think sometimes and you enjoyed it previously, you kind of, I guess, just jump at the chance and make sure that you
Oh,
can
yeah.
do it again. And also, when you have that sort of shorthand, there's probably makes it easier to work, but then also because you know each other on a personal level, you know that this story is going to be even mean a lot more to them, and you're going to handle it with even more care than, say, some other editor, for example. And especially when it's so close as well, like it is like a gut punch of a documentary. So when you kind of give more insight into it, that it's like a family friend, you're like, wow, that must be even harder to be doing like making a doc about it. Obviously it's quite important, but then kind of watching back over like moments where you kind of like could have stopped here, could have stopped here. And it's like there must have been
Yep.
moments where it was just probably just like I need a break because this is tearing me up a bit too much.
Yeah. And full transparency, as an editor, there is some, we all have our methods in almost like disassociating to get the job done. I've cut some docs about personal trauma, other personal traumas, and I don't think I've always been very good at self-care about them. Like I just kind of like get it done. I focus, I zoom out, their characters, it's a story. And then, 6 months later, I'm walking down the street and I burst into tears and I'm like, oh boy, I need to do some work on myself because I'm obviously absorbing it, even though I believe I'm like Teflon. And with this one, which the truth of it is that when I cried a lot while editing this film. And there are moments in this film that I still cry when I watch, which is a first for me, even if I've, seen it 1,000 times. And once I got to know the family, when we went to the film festivals, they came with us. And when I started to get to know them better, it changed the way I watched the film. It really did. Like I have a very hard time watching it now that I look in the imagery and see people that I know, you know, and so it's, I can't imagine. It's like the closest, I mean, that's, you know, the one of the first films I had a full editing credit on was called The Sentence. And that's kind of the film that broke me out onto the scene. And that family I got very close with after in its release too. And now I recently had to show a clip of it somewhere. And when I watched it, I was like, oh, I can't watch that either. So that's all to say, like, they're, you know, because I know them so well and it takes on a different meaning. So it's interesting in your question. I'm immediately sitting here going, wow, it's the closest I'll ever feel to what it's like to have a documentary made about people you know or yourself. But I'm not there and I can't imagine. Like I would sit back sometimes and say, wow, like Gita's literally watching body cam footage of people that she's met. That's insane, you know, or CCTV, you know, or court footage. I can't. That's it's a hard thing to wrap, but it also comes in and starts to create that responsibility that we take on as editors and creatives and everybody who's kind of a part of telling these stories. It's such a responsibility and such a privilege to handle these stories and be a part of, you know, offering them to the world while making really hard choices about what you tell. I mean, I'll share that one of the hardest things in committing to this approach was acknowledging that Ajika, we would not be painting a full portrait of Ajika. Like you're actually only going to see her in two calls, you know, before the night of the event. And that was a tough pill to swallow, to realize that, you know, although I tried to excavate all the details I could from the canvassing interviews and things to kind of give a description of who she was as a person, we were not going to spend the time that we wish we could have to really honor all the incredible things she was. So now the film has become a platform, you know, to talk about her and to share her story and say her name. So, but that was a moment in the creative process that was probably a big threshold to cross in committing to this approach. And when you talk about personal connection to film, I mean, that's, I think, whenever anybody sets out to make a film about something that's so tragic, one thing you want to do is make sure the world knows who, you know, was the victim of that tragedy.
Just want to sort of ask as well, because you got to know the family more, and each scene probably hit a lot harder. Were there moments when you're watching back now that you have a better relation? You have a, sorry, not better, I should say. Now that you have a relationship with family, where you look back at the doc and think you maybe you could have cut something a bit different to it.
No, no, because the goal, the aim, the compass, the North Star of our approach was giving this 360-degree view of this incident, this case, the events that led up to it, and was very much about staying rooted with the neighborhood. And so, although the family is obviously a part of that community, it was very much more about this personal perspective of that community. So, so yeah, it wouldn't have changed anything because the experience you have watching the film, you know, is larger than them, right? Like the scope of this story and the intersections of various societal concepts, just, you know, social justice, economic strata, classism, racism, like there's all of those things hold truth in an evidentiary way, like in the way that we did the approach of the film. So although we want it to feel personal and intimate, it's very intentional, like how we handled that evidence and created the entire film out of it. And there was really also nothing else I could have done with that footage to do that work, but it would have been a very different experience of a film, which is a preference thing. It's not better or worse, right? We make our choices. But to commit to this approach, what we did is kind of the best, most effective way we believe we could have done it.
Yes, and because I guess as audience members, you know something's going to happen, but we don't know who to.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also that build up of like the tension of what's going to happen. I guess it can be quite easy to probably Google about what it is, but I think that's
Yeah.
what sort of like so enticing about documentaries, and when you're in and when they're done so well that you don't Google or ahead to find out and spoil it for yourself. Um,
Yeah. Particularly in features. Once you're locked in, you're going. You know, series give you a little breathing room to jump ahead. But yeah, and I would say that this story was a national story in the U.S. It didn't kind of hit the. It's horrific that I can say this, but because there have been many stories that are kind of like this, some stories have kind of hit the zeitgeist bigger, and some haven't. And AJ's story was nationally covered, but I don't think did all the work everybody wanted it to in change. And so that was a big motivation for this film as well.
Yeah, which again, it's insane to think that like for us in the UK, obviously we don't have people do have sort of like guns for hunting, but not for like everyday, open carry sort of laws. So,
Yeah, yeah,
stuff like that doesn't it probably has happened in the UK, but without fact checking or anything. But it's also just like, yeah, insane to think that
yes,
it like
insane.
happens so often. And it can be used as like grounds just to what's it called? Grounds for like people to get away with what they sort of want to do and how they do
Yep,
it. It's just, yeah, mind blowing,
yep.
really. But what I'm curious to know about as well, because we look at the community and there's a conscious effort about creating this story about people and everybody on this street. Now, when I was growing up, we had a neighbor who was slightly older and was not very happy that we used to sort of play football
Mhm.
across the road and it would sometimes land on his grass or flowers. Now that I'm slightly older, I kind of understand his gripe now because that probably was his pride and joy, and we were just being little kids messing up a little bit for him. What I like really interested is just the how everything's captured in terms of like like the unit of like friendship in the whole street, and then how it's presented in the documentary. Because there's probably a certain amount of what's it called footage that you have to go through. Where did you begin in picking what was important and how you wanted to present the community in the story?
I think we knew early on that we would be doing a chronological telling of the story because, well, evidence, I mean, we wanted to tell it in order, let that simmer as it did, so everybody can kind of watch how it got to where it did. And it was a huge priority to really understand the community before it happened, which is rare. We don't see a lot of films where we can actually see a space and the events that led up to it. It's usually in the aftermath and a retrospective, and everybody's kind of working backwards and kind of sharing those stories. But to see it, to actually spend time with that community, which always blew my mind that in 2023 there were a bunch of kids just riding bikes outside and playing, because that is how I grew up as well. And I didn't think it still happened. I mean, I do live in the city now, so it's possible it's happening in pockets of our country, but it was felt like real world magic to watch those kids feel so free. So in the calls, all of the calls range between 30 minutes and like 3 hours. And then the night of the event was 5 or 6. I mean, it was, they were these varying calls that we would have to cut down, and this expanding and contracting of time that we were telling this story. The two primary calls, other than the first one, where you really spend time with the kids. There's a daytime call and a night call where the cop does the devil's advocate speech, where you really kind of get a sense of them. We were highly, those were precious. It was like we were highly sensitive to being able to be with those kids, feel the countering spaces of like them just being themselves and trying to be free and talking about their perspective of it. I mean, everybody always laughs about we're 11 or like just playing in the frame and laughing with the cops and all that stuff. And that is also adds light and levity to the film. It's not like a gut punch from opening frame to close. You have these kids in the beginning that of course is devastating and heartbreaking in retrospect, but when you're in that present moment, you see how much support and connection this community has. So that any call where you could really see it and feel it, you hear that gentleman say, we all look after these kids, and what in the night call, the woman, they say, which one's yours? And she's like, well, they're all mine. It's like all of those little details we were hyper aware and sensitive to. Like that attention to detail was very intentional because we wanted to paint that understanding about that community. So those calls where we could have that space became priority to spend time in those, while also offering all the perspectives and navigating what was the new piece of information we were learning in those calls. But when people talk to me about the film, they bring up those moments almost more than that. I mean, of course, we talk about the moments that just sear us and leave folks speechless, but they also bring up those moments. And we're very proud of that because beyond the reprieve or the laugh and the light, it really feels like people understand what that community was before everything happened.
I think as well, you mentioned about kids being on bikes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was my thoughts as well. But like, oh yeah, people actually still do this.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
it's,
yeah,
I did that as well, and I guess now like a digital age is so different, but at the same time, it's like, well, it's nice to see that people are still doing that and
yeah.
are still out sort of uh out on their bike and having fun. What I'm also sorry, but back to what you're saying because you were mentioning about building up this community and having it sort of the story be about them and how it's sort of maybe presenting it as in like this is like a could happen in anywhere in any sort of situation. I think you notice as well that like there's no this all the body cam footage is like quite the driving force and there's no sort of talking heads. I think the only real talking head stuff is more um the when the police are interviewing everybody after the incidents and that sort of stuff is peppered in. So there'll be one incident when the police will come, and then afterwards you'd hear the interview of one of the neighbors sort of backing up what had happened, but then also sort of pushing the timeline along. Was there any point where there was thinking of adding talking heads into the film itself to push it along, or was it always a conscious decision to say no, we're always going to use the body cam footage?
It was what I will say to that is they did film a couple of in like with the kids they kind of talk to camera, very loose, almost fairy tale style interviews after the fact with just some of the family members when they were in that advocacy section, that moment where they would kind of speak to the moment, not like retroactively tell the story that happened, just kind of. And but and I there was never talk of expanding that. What I would say to that, which I think is really important to be said, Gita has talked about this on many Q&As. There was a conscious awareness of not re-traumatizing this community by interviewing them to take us through, particularly because we did have the materials to tell the story without it. So beyond the optics of being able to use the evidence itself to tell the story, which did feel like it was undeniable, versus kind of having someone tell their take on it and how they felt, and us kind of feeling like we're just hearing such a subjective thing. So beyond that, committing to that approach, there is another factor here of when you interview people about something like this happening and taking them there again, what kind of impact that has on them and their own trauma and processing and grief. So I will say, as the editor on the film, there was never talk of doing interviews from when I joined. I mean, I think we had cracked the approach faster than the need of that. Like we kind of figured out that it was possible with those canvassing interviews to fill in a lot of the gaps and do the work in a very present tense observational experience. So there was never a moment of like, well, we could go get a pickup. It was like that was never in the conversation. And the other important factor is Gita's awareness of, what she wanted to put those people through or not, and what was actually necessary for this story. And it wasn't. And so all things were kind of happening very fast. So there was never a moment, anything you see in the film was kind of the initial instinct that we were able to see through to the end. And then, before we could face any of those crossroads, we kind of had already committed.
Okay, yeah, interesting because it is a very sort of, I guess, in a way that like with these documentaries, the talking heads do push them along, and I think maybe in a way sometimes you have those talking heads who kind of become like a weird caricature in the documentary that could technically
Yes.
take you out of it, which I like I understand like sometimes their decision from it because you might have a subject matter that needs a bit of like humor peppered into it. But I think,
Sure.
and maybe that's needed for something that's a longer form. So if it's like a three-parter or whatnot, compared to like a film, where
Yeah.
you're sort of
Or
like,
if that person, that caricature is actually necessary to the choices they made that affected the story. There's like a lot of levels beyond, I would argue, just kind of saying, well, we need some levity. It would be that their perspective is also commentary on the choice, the actual effects that happened on that story. There have been docs where I've watched where someone feels outlandish, and then you realize that they unto themselves are the commentary of the press, or the optics or the influence, and you go, okay, well, that's different. That's now activating an interview that you could, a layer of the story that would not be possible without that interview taking place. Yeah.
yes, and again, I guess it's also one of those things where it can be like a make or break thing because
Yeah.
they could be just a bit too much, and then you're just like, oh, okay,
For sure.
how do I
For
use
sure.
this?
Yeah, and I think that the personal stories, if you don't have the material to show it, and some people are ready to tell their story, right? There are like I as much as I do encourage, a show don't tell old school rule in film, and like trying to really trust the audience, and all those things are important. There is another level where some people want to tell their story, and they need to tell they need, that's a part of their processing and goal in their activism work or their personal story, and so that plays a role. It's case by case. I do fear that a lot of crime, true crime, that this genre that has kind of gotten a little out of control in the past few years, a little salacious or exploitative, or some of the mechanics and formulas that you're talking about we've acclimated to them in kind of a dangerous way, both for storytelling and the way we interact with humanity. So our film was also in dialogue with that in the grander scheme of storytelling, for sure. And trying to take a different approach and kind of force reality as the truth, the truth for what it really is.
And I think as well, like it's probably very easy to, I don't know, maybe just like to sort of change the way the documentary might become. And I guess it, like in this case, it wouldn't happen because it's all purely body cam footage. But I guess if you have body cam footage where it might just, I don't want to say like not serious, but if police sort of, um, what is it? If they're sort of like talking to the community a bit too much and they're sort of interacting a bit too jokely, it could sort of take away from what you're trying to build and also might make them look like they're not taking things too seriously and you kind of open a whole other can of worms of potential sort of like story issues and how you want to present things.
Yeah. I mean, I always thought it was fascinating. Our film wasn't about the police officers. We were like very much trying to flip the use of this body cam footage on its head to, Geeta always talks about this, but a very important element that footage, that lens has been used for so long to surveil, and it's been weaponized against communities. And so to all of a sudden use it as the lens to create visibility and understanding, represent a new form of representation, and just kind of watch through it to capture a story in kind of an absolute way was new and fresh. And with that came some interesting dialogue about community policing and, some ways of approaching. There is joking with the neighborhood. There is moments of levity and familiarity with these police that show you glimmers of hope. Yet, despite that, the tragic event still happened. So now there's a real nuanced conversation about what could have been done in the process, what could have been mediated, that the neighborhood should have filed report. They should have been advised to file reports against Susan. Like there's just such an incredible nuanced conversation about policing that's happening with this film, which I find fascinating and important, and also was just kind of baked in the experience of watching that footage for what it is. We didn't kind of have to lay it on thick. It's like it just permeates the concept of privilege and access and underestimating what people are capable of by kind of writing them off through archetypes. So it's really, yeah, to your point, like the police did create the opportunity for us to use the lens in an absolute way. If they had done different things, even with the nuanced conversation we're having within the film, with what they could have, should have, would have, right? Ultimately, because their behavior was not distracting in a way that would intercede in the story, we were able to use this lens the way we wanted to.
Yeah, and as well as like I think maybe it could have been quite easy to sort of go between what's the word like you could make people like look bad, but
Yeah,
it's not the
yeah,
case of that. It's kind of like more telling the story and how it sort of escalates. And I would it would be interesting to hear from like the police point of view because I can imagine once the body camera's off and somebody's in the car and they hear that the call has come from that street again, I reckon it's like on people's bingo card for when they're doing a shift
yeah,
that day or night of something happening. And then I guess once the call came in about that it's even like actually something's happened, it's probably just been like this is ridiculous. I can't believe it's like escalated to this.
yeah,
And they probably
yeah,
wouldn't expect that as well.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
this is talking about going back to earlier about when you're mentioning about self-care. And there was something that sort of popped into my mind a little bit because maybe it's like maybe it's not shouldn't be like a direct comparison because of the subject matter, but when you have a comedy and I can imagine when editors are editing a comedy, it's like jokes are gonna if the joke's good, it's gonna hit sort of time and time again. So, but when you're doing something like this, when you're editing scenes and you're sort of going back to them and being like, this still has that same impact. How do you as an editor sort of like take time to sort of step away from it, but then also continue to sort of process your work and what's happening on screen?
I think you mean by like giving it the understanding in when you were going to experience it within the edit. It's like being
Yes.
able to step away and reshape scenes.
Yeah, because you're
I
kind of
Yeah,
experiencing it time and time again, and like
yes,
it is quite. I don't think I'll watch it again, and that's not because of
that's fair.
the
Nope,
thing, but
totally
it's just
fair.
because of just
Yep.
how heavy it's. One of those docs is the same with
Yes.
like Dear Zachary, for example. It's like could never watch
Yes.
something like that again.
Nope. Watched it once. I Gosh, when people bring up Dear Zachary, when they because I remember how much that affected me. And so I'm like, wow, this film is doing that. I Yes, I think that the one tactic for me in being able to always understand what's happening in a scene and not kind of get lost in the weeds or remove things or add things and feel like I've lost the potency of perhaps an emotion that we were kind of wrestling with or even trying to create reprieve, right? Like, and not just absolutely smother and overwhelm is always seeing the film in its complete sense. So I watch the whole film a lot. So it's like if I'm kind of in a scene and I've made a tweak or taken something out or swapped something that I know is a really impactful, kind of piercing emotional experience, I will go work somewhere else, come back to it, or I'll watch the film to see how it's like building to this moment. Which sounds Captain Obvious, but I think some of us do get lost in the bricks of the building. We really do. We're cutting one scene and we get it till it feels great in this vacuum. And then when we kind of watch the whole thing, we realize that it's not doing the work we thought it would, or in the balance of things, it comes too close to something else that's doing the same whatever, eliciting the same emotion or doing the same work. So yeah, I would argue that there is certainly the step away, take a break. There's the watch the whole thing and it's complete. Um, and then there's always returning to your first impressions, which has always been a real North Star for me. When I first watch footage, and I am an obsessive who watches it from top to bottom. I will edit along the way. I'd love to clarify this because I feel like sometimes when I'm in editors' conversations and people say that, there are some editors who watch everything and then they start the edit. I am someone who, while I'm screening, I'm pulling and I'm playing and I'm trying, but I do want to watch all of it. And there is something about whatever my first instincts are in my experience of watching that footage that really informs my first pass. And that could change radically. I mean, I could be tearing the roots on that 100 times, but there is something in the original instincts that you always see in your final cut. It's like you end up, it's all full circle and you kind of come back to that. So when we're talking about emotions, there is very much something about the moments that kind of catch my breath the most, or the moments that make me, yeah, cry or hold still and frozen myself, and those never go away, and I think that there's a lot of times where I those will always kind of become the priority, and I'll return to those moments to really inform everything around them. So, but it's all in our experience, with the choices we're making and how we perceive the story. And there is a lot of, it's art, like any in creating stuff, and particularly as editors, the job is to make choices. And I will always own up to that. Well, we try to be as objective as possible. Yeah.
Okay. Again, it's interesting to hear, especially where you're, like how you work and going through footage and sort of constantly working on it whilst watching it, and sort of, I
Hmm.
guess that's like a great way to sort of start building the foundations of what's important and what might not be important, or what actually
Yeah.
is not important at the time could then become important afterwards, and then labeling that way as well.
Yeah. And you'll always go back. It's like I'm someone who will go near the end of an edit. It's almost some, I mean, on warmer projects, it's fun to use the word victory lap. On tougher projects, it's just kind of to make sure nothing, no stone has gone unturned. I'll kind of match frame back, and I'll go back through raw, and I'll return to old edits and just kind of do that walkabout to remind myself and make sure that I haven't, even if things feel effective, that I haven't lost my way from the things that I felt were what really drove the story from the beginning, from the outset, or whatever the initial mission statement, or when Geeta and I first talked, like what moved her the most, and that it has all been preserved, and that is also our job. Directors have to hear so many voices. There's so many chefs in the kitchen. There's so many moments. And when you get late and you second guess yourself and near the end of the edit, there's always that kitchen sink moment where they like put it all back in. Gita's good about it. She doesn't do that. But like there's a lot of directors I've worked with where that happens. And and you kind of learn why you made your choices. And it's an important part of the process. So I feel like, yeah, I guess that I'm also trying to send the message that you can't be precious. I mean, you can fight for things. You can find the hills you want to die on, but you should try everything. And so even as I'm screening and I'm trying stuff, I'm going to build a lot of things that nobody in the world will see that I love, that I think are important, and and yet everything that will actually meet your audience's eyes will become the vital stuff. So yeah,
I just want to pick up on something you said, because obviously when you're working on something, let's say on like day one, you'll see something, but then day 57, you might be close to the finish, and then you kind of go back to it and then see it with like a different set of eyes, or
yeah.
even like maybe missed or want to add something. What's that like as an editor, sort of looking back at it and then figuring it out with sort of a fresh set of eyes or a different kind of perspective because you've worked on it for so long?
Sometimes it's thrilling. In this film, I would say, even in the mix and color, we were sitting in that studio still, whenever we'd watch it down, having a new conversation about it. I mean, honestly, I think everything was intentional and we kind of knew what we were engaging with, but every time we watched the film, we picked up something new from it, from the finished edit. It wasn't even like, when you're just kind of seeking out and finding stuff. There is something about last minute ads that does, of course, make me nervous. Like, I'm human. You've built this house of cards, and there is a little bit where you're like, ooh, I need time to marinate. Like I need time to know what it's doing and why. So two things can happen. It's like there's one thing where you find that gem and it just kind of cracks everything open, and it either ripples out where you're gonna have to make a lot of changes, or it just feels like it was inevitable, like you put it in and it was meant to be the whole time, and you were like, oh my gosh, and it's like real world magic. And then there's the other part where you kind of sit back and start to realize there's something that you just have to put in there to do your due diligence, that the world needs to hear. But you've created a very delicate thing where every frame counts and it all matters, and it could really change the balance or the flow or the emotional journey or the personal perspective and narrative, and that when you do that really late in the process, it can make you question a lot of things. So I think it's important to stay attentive to both of those, versions of that hurdle, and at the same time trust the process. But I do want to say, as you were starting that question, I was like, oh wow, even today, every time this team, we all, as the creative people who made this film, every time we watch this film, we pick on something different. Like we literally will go, oh my god, when he said that, I never thought about how it connects to, it's like, which in a beautiful way means that we've created the film that kind of does all the work all the time in different ways, depending who you are and what you're watching and where your headspace is. So every scene of this, I kind of pick up a little something new every time I watch it, which is incredible.
Yeah, and it's probably quite like it being able to sort of work on something all the time, on like a documentary, for example, and going sort of back and forth on it has probably helps you sort of gauge a different perspective.
I'm gonna I'm gonna jump in and tell you that this film was not my full-time job. I actually was on a different film, and Gita came to me and said beautiful things like, it's got to be you. I want it to be you, which was incredible. But I said, I am booked. And she said, okay, I don't care how you do it. Just, we want to get it done by next fall. And I was like, okay. So this film was nights and weekends and stretches near the end after I had completed the other film. So it was interesting going back and forth between two projects. And sometimes there'd be months that I didn't touch this one. So it was one of the purest forms of creation I've ever had, because it was so instinct, heart driven, in spaces that felt purely fueled by passion. There wasn't some big budget on this thing. We really made it in a vacuum. Netflix didn't make, we made it independently, went to Sundance and Netflix bought it. And so it was such, the labor of love comment is really true with this one. And so, some people are like, how did you live in this all the time? And in some ways, I wish I had, I mean, just because of the benefits of being able to have that time. And then in some ways, it's kind of incredible that I didn't. And I wonder if that constantly invented a fresh palette, right? Like constantly gave me this canvas to have perspective on, because I had to be somewhere else a lot, and so it was like constantly coming through. Also, feel craving getting into this material to do this work because it was so specific and unique of an experience. So everything about this was so different than anything I've ever experienced. And the idea that it is doing the work it's doing now has felt incredibly validating to gut instincts and kind of just going with it and believing in it. And so yeah, living in it all the time is it's in here all the time, but it wasn't my all day every day, which I think played a factor. Yeah.
I guess that also, as you said, like it gives you a way of sort of stepping in and out of it and not living with it every day.
Yes.
And
Yes. Yes.
yeah, and having the opportunity to be like, well, yeah, I can do this, like play around with this. And then kind of in your mind, you can kind of have it in the back of your mind that you're working on something. But then at the same time, you come back to it, you can say, actually, that idea that I had a few weeks ago or months ago
Oh yeah.
doesn't work. And do you
Yep.
feel like it might be a slight cheat code that you can kind of have that little bit extra time to go through things and then come back to it and so on?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Total cheat code. I will say this. I've been very, very lucky to work with. I have like this small collective of directors that I've worked with over and over again, where I've built a lot of trust. And so I regularly am working on more than one project at the same time, varying capacities, different expectations, different timelines. It's only when I know that I can kind of give my best self in to those it's, I certainly wouldn't compromise that. Yet at the same time, it's kind of like a secret superpower. And it's not about being able to multitask. It's about embracing process in a really important way. I think there is something to be said when you're full time on something and you kind of singular vision and you're in it. There is magic that can be woven from that kind of singular focus. However, for me, I think my best work comes from being able to utilize all the tools all the time and step away and come back. And there's a lot of folks when I write sometimes for fun, and I was in this writing group, and the advice was always like when you finish a script to put it in a drawer for 6 months and then come back. Like you can't just be like, I'm done, let's go. Like it was like you needed that time to step away. We never get that time as editors and I mean, who nobody has the money or the budget to do that, but we're also always, going for the festival deadlines or the way the year works, or there's so many factors that wouldn't allow that time. So it's like a miniature version of that to be able to come and go and work on other and go somewhere completely different and then come back even within a couple of days. It really does make a difference. It kind of gives a microcosm of that.
Mm. And I think that's a really good way to end the episode, knowing that you can
Yeah.
kind of have that microcosm and that going back and forth and allowing the film to breathe and also having time to
Yes.
sort of go back and forth with it and play more with the what is it, the story and the idea and how it should be told.
Yeah, and those projects, should you have the privilege of being or the ability or however we all like to work, but if you are someone who can work on more than one project at the same time, a really incredible thing happens when they're not in dialogue with each other because they were so different, disparately, like insanely different, the films that I were on, but you do kind of look back and realize the interplay that happened in your brain, in your creative sensibility, in what you were rebelling against or what you were embracing, or, from one project to the next. And I am someone who really is romantic. I say this so much, but I really am romantic about what we do. And I think about collections of work and, what story are we telling in each project and all of the projects collectively. And that's something I love being precious about. And I think that happens in my workflow and creates, yeah, I care. I care a lot. So I think that I'm still learning a lot of what those conditions are to do my best work, but I really do encourage folks to trust the process and, yeah, switch it up sometimes and see what that does for you.
Yeah, of course. And as you said, being part of the writers group, putting script away, allowing
Hmm.
yourself to maybe step away and come back to it if you can. Um,
Yeah.
and it's like just getting that whole fresh perspective, or even allowing your brain to just be like figure out what you might have been stuck on.
Yes, exactly.
Viri, thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you for having me. This is wonderful.
The Perfect Neighbour is streaming now on Netflix. Go out and watch Viri's and her team's work. Yeah, thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You take care and bye bye. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.